Hey, y'all.
Hey, and welcome back to Night Shift with Andrea Up Late. Happy Tuesday, everybody. We have kind of gotten on an every other Tuesday kick, I feel like, because it's summertime. So we're spending time doing other things, looking into some older cases, some other things like that. So we're not necessarily putting out a night shift every single week. We will do our best to do that. Otherwise, you can definitely count on an every other week. I am joined, as always, by my co-host Brian Sanders. Brian, how you doing?
Wonderful. Doing absolutely wonderful.
Wonderful, as always. Brian is a retired homicide lieutenant, so as you can imagine, in a true crime podcast like this, his expertise lends a lot toward all the things that we talk about. So we are going to dive in tonight with a case that we covered. I covered on Night Shift a couple of years ago. We've not discussed it really much since. It really has not had a ton of headway or a ton of coverage, I would say. Even now, going back to look back through to see if, kind of more has come to light over the years since I covered it. It really hasn't. And so this will be my first time covering it with Brian in the co-host chair. And so I look forward to that. But again, man, it's to be such a salacious, big, tragic case at the time. It was 1995. I don't know. It's kind of interesting that it was a bit open and shut and that there's not much more lingering, wouldn't you say?
Yes, especially when we start to get into it. And there's one or two other cases that have a little bit of similarity. They got big coverage, obviously, that were national news back then.
Around that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in saying that, it's been a minute since we've done our pop culture bit. So we have our pop culture guru, Brian Sanders. Like I said, we kind of keep it quiet that he was a homicide lieutenant, but really, his expertise is pop culture. And so it's that of decades past usually. And so we're going to get into 1995. How do you feel about 95? You feeling strong?
95 was actually a really, really good year.
Okay. For you individually or just pop culture, the world, the United States?
For me, for pop culture, definitely the 90s was like the decade of great movies.
Okay,
some would call it cinema. We call them movies. Yeah, we just call them movies. But
I agree. I would say hip hop and movies hit their peak in the 90s.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Some would say the era of sitcoms were over by 95, but I don't know.
I'll take some cheesy 90s sitcoms all day long. It's been a long time since I've seen them, but I feel like I could enjoy that a little bit.
So 95, Brad Pitt was voted sexiest man alive by People magazine. We don't even have like magazines much anymore. Everything.
Well, People still does the yearly like sexiest man alive. They still do the woman. The man, they do all of that still. What year? But what was he in 95?
That's what. Well, I was about to say like by 95, it was probably.
Was that a meet? Was that a joke? Was it?
Meet Joe Dirt.
I almost said. Do you know? I almost said that.
I read your mind. And we've actually never talked about that. I don't think, but just for some reason that joke popped in my head. But I'm gonna go with that was like coming off of the heels, probably of like
Legends. Was it Legends?
Legends of the Fall.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably would have been 95.
Let me see. I'm gonna look it up right now. I'm telling you. Oh, oof.
7?
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
Really? That was 95.
That was 95. So then let's see what was 94, right? Because that's what's leading him into the category to win the 1995. Oh, we got a lot. So Brad Pitt in 94 was, I'm going to start small. We're going to start with The Favor. So Shadow Casting, The Making of a River runs through it. But then we have the two biggies, Legends of the Fall and Interview with the Vampire.
That's the other one.
So that's, I would assume, I'm going to go with The Vampire. Got him that in 95, probably, for a pop culture reference.
Do you remember what the first movie he was in? We talked about this one time on the episode.
I'm sure we have.
It was like, but it was still like pretty early. Like I thought 90 or 91. He was like he ran track, and his brother was Ricky Schroeder, I think.
Oh, we did.
He was
talk
smoking
about
that crack. Ricky was, I think.
Smoking that crack.
But that was like very quickly. Brad Pitt became like the movie star. Apparently, People magazine. Kate Moss and Johnny Depp were a couple.
Yeah.
I guess that was before.
That was a big deal. That was a
before
big deal. Amber Heard, yes.
Or
No, that was I mean, he's had a few leading ladies, but that was kind of that quintessential, I would say.
Were they married or they were
heavy on the nose candy? A lot was going on with the Kate Moss, Johnny Depp time, but that's a fun time. Okay, go ahead.
Coolio's Gangster Paradise
was
the song of the year.
Yeah.
Probably still is, I bet.
Of course it was.
Braveheart won Best Picture.
Okay.
Again, 1990s.
Fair. Yeah. Good movies.
OJ trial wrapped up, and some call this the OJ trial. Oh.
Yeah, some call this case. No, you're right. You're right. The case that we're about to talk about took place in Springfield, Missouri. We're going to reference another case that took place in Springfield, Missouri, just a couple of years prior to this, that we have covered a couple of times. But when the trial of the case that we're about to cover took place, some at that time called it the OJ trial of Springfield. And it's primarily because of a tagline that was used throughout the trial that was, "You got the wrong guy." Which is always interesting because it's not like, "Hey, can you find the right one?"
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's "You got the wrong guy." So that happened a lot during this case.
"Hey, mother bleep."
Yeah.
You got the wrong guy.
Yeah.
Anyway. The Macarena.
Yeah, do you remember it?
No.
Come on.
I remember, you know what?
You don't remember this?
Actually, earlier when we were down the street.
Okay.
At the neighbor's house down there.
Uh-huh.
And Heather was doing she did that thing that she was the Texas Longhorn thing.
It would make sense that it's similar.
But
you guys, if you're from Texas, if you're a Longhorns fan, is that similar to the Macarena? That would make sense that it would be kind of similar, right?
Yeah, but whatever she did, that's what I thought of.
Yeah.
Or Three Amigos.
Yeah, I know.
I think they're very similar.
Yeah, same.
But yeah, I guess that was the big dance craze.
Oh my.
Drew Barrymore flashed David Letterman.
Yes, she did. Do you guys remember that? She stood straight up. Do you remember that episode?
I do.
Yeah, she stood on the deck. She was she like 22 or something?
Probably.
She was young. Yeah.
That was like a big deal back then.
Oh, it was a huge deal.
And David Letterman was a big deal. Like people still watched.
For sure, he was a big deal. And I think that I didn't get it then. I'm sure, like, I'm no spring chicken, but I feel like people maybe a decade older would have considered it differently. But I think I didn't realize then that like the goal was to fluster him because he got flustered so easily. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we've gone back since and seen some like snippets of interviews with like Cher and he was beside himself. He was so flustered, and it didn't take much. If a woman was just a bit aloof and a bit just kind of you can't handle this, like without saying as much, even like he just was tripping over his words and he couldn't. And so the episode when Drew Barrymore flashed him, it's hilarious, and she's just so funny. Like it's too easy, right? Like it was low hanging fruit, so to speak. Not Drew. I'm not insulting Drew, but I'm just saying that the idea of all of that. Yeah. And he got so flustered he couldn't speak.
I think he had a crush on Cher. Is that the one we watched? Where he seemed like
he seemed at least intimidated by her. Yeah. For sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Toy Story was the first computer animated film. And it was a big hit, apparently.
Wait, okay, say that again.
Toy Story was the first computer animated film. And it was a big hit.
Do you know that I don't remember, like at the time, I'm sure that we were told that, but I don't remember learning that understanding that was the first. Maybe so though. Maybe that's why it was such a big, I don't know. That was a really cool hit.
Yeah, it was. I was just flashback to when I was a little bitty kid and saw the movie Heavy Metal. But that was all art, all hand drawn. It wasn't computer animated. So none of that matters.
Oh.
Windows 95.
Stop motion? Is it claymation?
That's not nice. Windows 95 became like a big deal, apparently.
Was that da-na-na-na? I'm trying to think of the tune. You remember when it would open up on your computer? Oh,
well, by the time I started messing around with any kind of computer or Windows, it was probably 98.
Okay.
So 97. I don't know if it still did that or not. Sorry, I'm a loser. Starbucks Frappuccino was released.
Oh.
You ever heard of that drink?
Heard of it. I don't get a lot of those, but obviously they're wildly popular.
I wonder if they were still like $8 or whatever they charge now.
Well, it's interesting, right, that hits like a timeline, like a mark when you look back and say, what was kind of like some pop culture events in 1995, and the Starbucks Frappuccino like makes the list as like you know what I mean? That's interesting. It makes sense though. I mean, people.
Yeah. They lose their minds.
They lose their minds. Like we're now 30 years later.
Yeah.
And it's still.
Actually, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
I don't even think I'd heard of Starbucks. I bet I was probably mostly West Coast at the time. Anyway, is this eBay debuted on the internets? eBay in 95? Wow.
That was a big deal. I mean, I feel like that was one of the first, I mean, outside of like an AOL or like a chat group, right? But that was your first kind of interactive sales that I can think of experience.
Yeah.
Felony Melanie in the chat says she still knows how to use Windows 95. Do you remember the tune? Can you convey it through chats, Felony Melanie? Can you do it? Because I'm trying to remember. I feel like I have it in my head somewhere.
Sorry.
What?
I failed you because I couldn't.
Can you not remember? I can't remember it. If you guys are new here, Night Shift is a live YouTube show most Tuesday nights. Almost in the wintertime, definitely every Tuesday night. In the summertime, we're a little bit more sporadic. Either way, you can listen to it wherever you stream your audio podcast in the next day or two after we air live on a Tuesday night. But that being said, if you are here on a Tuesday night, you are always welcome to join the chats. It's free. You just log into YouTube. All you need is an email address that you were rendered at birth and a password, and you can log right on in. It doesn't cost a dime. And you can chit chat with us. So we have some friends that we always like to say hello to, and we would like for you to come be our friend. Come join in the chat. Say hey to us. We engage a little bit at the beginning. We tell the case, and then toward the end, we cut up a little bit and like to talk to whoever's in the chat. Also saw we have an Ellie Walker in the chat who says that she is tuning in from Springfield, Missouri. So I will be interested to hear what Ellie might have commenting tonight. Ellie, if you don't mind to let us know in the chats, you don't have to give your age away, right? But like, were you or family members around when this went down in 95? Do you remember hearing about this in 95? We're talking about the Feeney family murders. And then, so a precursor to that, have you wrapped up your pop culture there, Brian Sanders? Down with it. Okay. So a precursor to the Feeney family would have been just 2 years prior in 93 was the Springfield 3. So that would be the case where a mother, her teenage daughter, and her daughter's best friend all essentially vanished. Like they were raptured. They apparated. They were gone from the family home. The girls had gone to some senior activities. They were graduating. They had some things to do the next day with friends. They even had a change of plans in the middle of the evening, which we talk about that often because if someone obviously is planning something, but someone has had a change of plans, they couldn't have anticipated that they would be where they were going to be that night. And they did. They came back home. And next thing you know, under some strange circumstances, no one answered the phone the next day. Purses were there, asthma medication, cigarettes, money, right? Beds were turned down. TV was on static. Wash rags were damp with makeup as though they had washed their faces. Everything was ready. It looked like everyone was ready to go to bed. It looked like mom had probably gone to bed because her eyeglasses were on the nightstand beside her bed. Her book was turned over as though she had read herself to sleep, right? Put her book down to go to bed. Gone. No sign of a struggle. No sign of forced entry. No blood. Nothing. And to this day, not one of the three has been found. Their bodies have never been recovered. And so that's a wild case. We've covered it a couple of times. It's certainly one that will, I don't know. It's one that I hate to say I don't have hope for. It's just my goodness, right? But then we hear of crazy things happening all the time. So I would love to hear at some point in this lifetime that, they figured something out about that one, because it's almost like a magic trick. It's just wild how it happened with literally nothing and no witnesses. But in saying that happened in 93 in Springfield, Missouri. And like I said, they were referred to as the Springfield 3. And then just 2 years later, this case of the Feeney family happened in 1995. Not at all connected, not at all similar even, but just as incredibly tragic. So that's what we're going to dive into tonight. Again, and like I said, that I covered this a couple years ago, and we're just going to kind of briefly recap it tonight. So let's get started. What do you say, Brian?
Boom.
Boom. Boom, bam. Okay, and sorry to you guys who usually listens to us on Tuesday. We're a little bit later than normal tonight. I'm sure you can't blame me for that at all. So this was a small town murder that, as you can imagine, when I say a Feeney family murder, I mean that there's a mom, a dad, and 2 children, and 3 out of those 4 were murdered on this one night. So as you can imagine, a small or a large town, this was a wildly tragic case. A lot of news coverage locally there when it first happened, not a whole ton nationally. And then, like I said, since then, there's not a whole lot. Really quick to just go back, Ellie in the chat said that she's very familiar with the Springfield 3, but doesn't know much about the Feeney case. So, all right, Ellie, well, listen up. We're going to chat about it. So we have Jon and Cheryl Feeney were married. Okay, so they were a successful couple in their 30s. Jon was 36 at this time. He was a chemistry teacher at a local high school, and Cheryl was in like a supervisory role as a nurse in the surgical gynecological department in the local Cox Hospital. Again, a little tie back to the Springfield 3 was there is some speculation that potentially the 3 that are missing, that their bodies were disposed of in the newly built parking garage of the Cox Hospital, Cox Memorial, when it was being built. So they were making a new parking garage to that hospital at that time in 93. And so they used ground penetrating radar, et cetera, to try to see if they could potentially find their bodies. Again, kind of the side note, because that's not the case we're covering tonight, but they did find some odd shadows, some odd things that potentially could have been one or more human remains, but it wasn't enough for them to find that they could justify the money and resources to kind of dig up and, excavate through this newly developed parking garage. But at that hospital, and that parking garage is where Cheryl Feeney worked as a nurse in the surgical gynecology floor. So the 2 had 2 children. Jennifer, little baby Jennifer, was about 18 months old at this time, and a little boy named Tyler, who was 6 years old. All right. So on the morning, this was going to be in February, right? So on the morning of February 25th, that was a Saturday, Cheryl left that morning to run some errands. So she did some shopping, ran some errands. She came home and the family had lunch together. And soon after they had lunch, Jon gathered his things and left to go to a conference. All right. So Jon was going to a conference called Interface 95. So this would be in Osage Beach. This was like Lake of the Ozarks. So if you've actually watched the pretty wildly popular TV show with Jason Bateman, the Ozarks, like this is kind of that area, right? Lake of the Ozarks. So that's where this conference is going to be held in the Tentera Resort. So from all accounts, I've heard other people talking about it that have been there. It was a pretty nice place. Families would go and vacation there. You had individual residences, cabins, hotel rooms, these kinds of things, pool, the lakes, all of that. But this is where this conference was held for math and science instructors. And again, like I said, Jon was a chemistry teacher at the local high school. So he was going to go there. It's to last a few days. Again, this was on a Saturday, kind of midday, he heads out. And so that's where he goes. So he was set to present his own material on Sunday, the 26th. But then on Monday morning, he got a call from the high school that he worked at. Evidently, baby Jennifer, remember the 18-month-old, was supposed to go to the babysitters on Monday. So mom was to go to work. Jennifer was to go to the babysitter, and the babysitter never saw Jennifer. When she calls home, she can't get in touch with Cheryl. So she just calls the high school where dad, Jon, works, right? And to tell him, like, hey, what's going on? Am I going to be babysitting Jennifer today? So the high school, of course, Jon's gone to the conference, calls him there. So when they reach out to him, this, as Jon will put it, is the first time he's realized that anything was amiss. So he gets a call on Monday morning saying that they can't get in touch with Cheryl, his wife. So he says his account is that he called his parents and he called Cheryl's parents to check in on the family. We have some discrepancy here, and we're going to talk about what that discrepancy was. So let's go on and set the scene a little bit, because when Jon got to the conference on that Saturday evening, it didn't take long before he and an acquaintance, we'll say, named Pam, meet up and go to dinner. Her name is Pam Krover. So they go to dinner. And when I very first heard about this, I thought, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess everybody has their way of doing things, right? I feel like it may not fly in a lot of households that you leave your family to go out to a conference out of town and immediately meet up with someone of the opposite sex to go to dinner, but maybe they're old pals. We don't know, right? Well, come to find out, they were more than old pals, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But they would use these instances of these conferences, these getaways, to spend a little bit more romantic time together, Jon and Pam. So on the evening of that Saturday night, on the 25th, he and Pam go out to dinner. So you need to keep in mind that Osage Beach, where this conference was held, is about 90 miles away, 87 to 90 miles from their family home. So, you're looking at like an hour and a half drive, let's say, right? So not too long of a trek, but he's far enough away from home that I feel, that he felt pretty comfortable. So they go to dinner, and while they go to eat, on their way home, they get stopped. He gets pulled over. He was speeding. So this would have been at 8:37 p.m. And he gets speeding ticket for going 52 miles an hour in a 35 mile an hour zone. But so get this, 1995, you and I have talked about this, Brian, but not something I'm used to hearing. But evidently, since he was more than 50 miles away from home, the cop takes his license as collateral. Basically, he didn't have cash on him in the moment to pay for the ticket. He takes the license so that Jon wouldn't skip town and not pay for this ticket, takes it back to the station with instructions for Jon to come back and pay for his ticket. All right. So do you know of anything like that? Are you used to that kind of a rule?
I wasn't, but
not Myrtle, that you gave speeding tickets.
Yeah, no. I was saying not when I was on patrol, but at Myrtle Beach, spring break in the 90s, like that. If I remember right, you could pay right there. You would pay the officer for the violation. They collect the money.
Well, and it sounds like that's what would have happened here, right? Had he had the cash on him, but since he didn't, they take the license so he won't skip town.
That's crazy.
Right? So we have so we always talk about some, hard timelines and timestamps that we have. So we definitely have him. This is a body cam recorded traffic stop. Okay. So at 8:37 p.m., we definitely have him stopped by a police officer. His license is taken for the speeding ticket. And so, excuse me. So we have that time. Keep that one in your head. So they get back, he and Pam get back to the resort, and they're supposed to hang out together. They're supposed to also go to some of the after parties that are going on that evening. But Jon said he had a headache, so he couldn't really hang. Okay. I kind of make that face and say that because you're going to learn a little bit more about Jon and some of his proclivities. And it seems that to be away from home, and this is not really, none of this is just me suspecting something. This is kind of pretty well documented throughout when you talk about Jon's life and his lifestyle. And it seems that even Cheryl was kind of aware of some of this stuff. Him getting away from home and being out with some people to party and have a good time, or being with another lady, is not typically a case when he would usually find himself having a headache, I should say. So at 9:15 that same evening, right? So the traffic stop was at 8:37. So Jon says that at 9:15, he called Cheryl from his room and they spoke for about 5 minutes, and phone records do corroborate him saying this. So they talked for about 5 minutes. And then at 10:30, Jon left to go to the police station to retrieve the license that had been taken from him upon getting that speeding ticket. So he says that he went there, paid the $60, got his license back, and goes back to the resort and goes back to his room and falls asleep for the night. Okay. keep in mind, he was supposed to be going to these parties that he turned down going to at 9:15 or, 9 to 9:15 by saying he had a headache, calls home, and then leaves about an hour later to go to his. Okay, I mean, it's plausible. He could have, sure. He also had nowhere to be the next morning. He was there on site because he had golf to go to, conferences to go to, conferences to present. So it's not that he had to have his license like first thing in the morning, let's say, or even really throughout the next day. So just kind of keep that in mind. He did leave after proclaiming a headache, turning down all the festivities that he was normally really a part of. And went and got his license. And he says he went home, like I said, to go or back to the resort and went to sleep. So he says in his initial reports with police that nothing happened at all the rest of that night. So that would have been that Saturday night, the first night he gets there, dinner with a female acquaintance, speeding ticket, going back to pay the ticket, coming back and sleeping. And he says nothing else happened until 11 o'clock the next morning, which would have been the 26th. And he says that, he woke up and at 11, he's going to his first conference. And that's kind of when his day gets kicked off. Well, the discrepancy here is kind of a large one because when police do the initial search of his car, just because, right, like we're about to talk about the murder of his family, but his only alibi is his word that he was asleep in his hotel room that night. So of course they kind of look through his car, and upon like the immediate search of his belongings, investigators find a McDonald's receipt with a timestamp in Osage Beach of 6:29 a.m. on the morning of the 26th. He said he did nothing except for starting his day at 11 o'clock in the morning. So, I mean, I kind of go back and forth with that one a lot because part of me says he's just been told what I'm about to tell you about, this huge, horrible thing that happened to his entire family. So is it possible that, especially if it wasn't really in his norm to go to McDonald's early in the morning, that it just slipped his mind, right? And he just didn't think about it. Yeah, my day got started at 11. That's when I had the first conference, whatever. Maybe. But I think one of the first things that I think you talk about, Brian, when we talk about either victimology or that of a suspect is when you talk to friends and family and kind of canvass all of that, what is something you're looking for?
Patterns.
So a pattern of behavior. What is their common behavior? What is out of the norm for them? Okay, so all of Jon's acquaintances, like anyone that is interviewed throughout this entire time, has said that wasn't his norm. Like his norm would not be to wake up early in the morning to go to McDonald's. In fact, if he had to schedule an appointment or a meeting, it was always going to be later in the morning. In fact, he typically would be known to run a little bit late. Like that was kind of just his pattern. So his pattern was not to wake up extra early to go get a McDonald's breakfast at 6:30 in the morning. So this is highly circumstantial. Obviously, this doesn't necessarily mean anything, but just something to keep in mind, right? So we have a gas station clerk named Ron Gann, and we're going to talk about how this hurt the prosecution terribly later on. He was a gas station attendant who says that he saw Jon getting gas at 1:30 in the morning on February 26th. So this would have been the overnight, right? The Saturday night into Sunday morning at 1:30 in the morning. And he says he described Jon's car. He had a red soft top convertible Mustang. He described the car. He describes Jon. He says, absolutely, I saw him there. The problem's going to come for prosecution, though, because Ron Gann evidently neglected to clock in that day. So there isn't record of him working. So we don't actually have a hard, timestamp of Ron being there. They can't prove that his word is golden, right? So that's kind of what went on there. So let's talk a little bit about what happened the morning of, it would be Monday the 27th. So Jon talks about getting there that night, right on Saturday the 25th. He goes to dinner with Pam, gets a speeding ticket. This is a pretty concise timeline. There's not a lot. We talk about some cases that are extremely convoluted or complex when it comes to the ins and outs of the timeline and different individuals involved. This one's not at all. It's a pretty tight one. So he gets there. We've got the dinner time. him being pulled over at 8:37 p.m. He calls Cheryl at 9:15 p.m. on the night of the 25th. They speak for 5 minutes. At 10:30, he goes to the police station. Of course, we have record from them there that he was there at 10:30 to retrieve his license and pay his speeding ticket fine. He says he goes back to his room and falls asleep. He says nothing happens until 11 o'clock the next morning. We at least do have him at McDonald's, in fact, at 6, I said 29, I believe it's 6:59 in the morning on the 26th. That would be Sunday morning. He will go on to say that he did play a round or two of golf. This is corroborated by other people there at the resort. He actually presented his own information that day on that Sunday. And he will say he called home a couple of times on that Sunday and never got an answer. So he never talks to Cheryl the entire day of that Sunday, the next day after he had gotten there. All right. So at all. So not even, he goes to bed Sunday night, still hasn't spoken to her. Monday morning is when he gets the call from the high school he worked at, right? Because the babysitter that was supposed to keep baby Jennifer calls the high school looking for him because Cheryl has not brought the baby. So he says that he called his parents and Cheryl's parents to go check on the family. Now, any source you find on this will say the same thing. It's interesting because this is one like kind of giant disparity and all. He will say every time, well, I called my parents, I called my mom because she has a key to the home. I've not heard one account from his mother, so I cannot say whether he called her or not. Either way, what we know happened on the other side, and this is what was actually presented at trial, is that one of Cheryl's coworkers named Teresa's at work that Monday morning and Cheryl's not there. And she said this was highly unusual, that Cheryl was always at work, always on time, like very rarely ever called out. And if she did, she would call out. She wouldn't just not show up. And so it was already interesting or strange to Teresa, you know. So she calls Cheryl a few times, can't get her. This was alarming to her. She calls around. No one has seen her. We know that, like on a parallel timeline, we've got the babysitter not getting baby Jennifer. We'll find out later that Tyler wasn't arriving to school, right? So no one is where they are supposed to be that morning. But we have Jon just out at the conference in Osage Beach, kind of having a good old time, but he has not spoken to them that entire day prior. Okay. So Teresa says that after she called Cheryl a few times, finally she said, you know what? I wanted to go check on her. And we talk about this in a lot of cases. It's interesting, this little, you know, kind of extra sense that people get sometimes when they just, that spidey sense, if you will, when something just doesn't seem right. And so Teresa says that she goes to Cheryl's home. And when she pulled in immediately, this was a Monday morning, she says that she saw the Sunday paper in the driveway and that this was alarming to her. She knew that just stood out. That wasn't right. I've joked with Brian about this kind of thing because you could see a Sunday paper in the driveway and don't worry, I'm fine. That does not mean that ill fate has befallen me. You could go to the mailbox and find a week's worth of mail. What do I do with the mailbox?
You pull it out, you look at it, and you put it back in.
Yeah, you just put it back in. We'll look at it later.
Leave it there.
And so,
it's a good storage place.
But for people like Cheryl, it was a big deal that the Sunday paper was there on a Monday because she was pretty astute. She was going to pick it up and take it in, right? Yeah. So when Teresa saw that, she knew something was not right. And again, you know, keep in mind that she had the sense to go there. Like she left work to go to her home. Like something already didn't feel right. So when she gets there and sees the Sunday paper there, that kind of corroborated, I think, some of her misgivings or her fears that morning. And she says she got up to the front door, and the first thing she noticed was that the glass panes or panels of the front door seemed to have been painted, like from the inside, painted white. And she's been to Cheryl's home before, and so she was like, this is not something I've seen. Like that was out of the ordinary. That seemed weird. And she says she started to feel kind of odd about everything. But she checked the door. So this was the front door. Okay. She checked it and it was unlocked. All right. So she kind of starts to open the door and tentatively begins to walk in the home. And when she does, she pretty quickly realizes that things don't look right. It looks as though to have been ransacked. Things were not in their proper place. And she just stopped dead in her tracks. And she calls the local police department because she didn't like how any of this felt. Okay. And obviously so local police department gets there. So like I said, there is a lot of discrepancy on who got there first. Was it Jon's mother? Was it Cheryl's parents? Was it just the police department independently? But either way, reported in court for this was that Teresa was there, Cheryl's coworker, and then local police get there. And so she will say that she and the deputy starts to walk in the home to do basically a well check on the home and on Cheryl and the kids. And she said that she was like, well, she didn't know if she should follow him in or not, but also he didn't stop her. So she thought, okay, like I'm going in with him. So she walks in behind him. They start to walk through the house. She says, of course, he's stopping to look in the kitchen, the living room. She's noticing more and more how things are disheveled and kind of, she describes as ransacked. And they finally go down the hallway to where the bedrooms are, and they get to the first bedroom. And she says that when the deputy looked in, she didn't look in with him, that his entire demeanor changed. His face fell, his arms fell flat. He made a noise, and she said she knew right then something terrible had happened. And she said, I knew. And I said to him, is she dead? And he didn't respond. And then she repeats herself and says, is she dead? And he would be at that moment looking into, like I said, Cheryl's bedroom. And evidently the deputy said to her, Teresa's reports are that he said, look for yourself, which we've talked about. Yeah. Obviously not the response you would hope to hear from a deputy. You want to hear him say probably like, ma'am, please go outside. You don't want to look in here. I'll tell you all about it. Go outside, right? Like, what would you?
Yeah, you don't want to overreact, but even from the beginning, usually we wouldn't let people go in because you don't
know what
you don't know what you're going to find. You assume the worst, and sadly, like that's what happened. And now you're stuck because a family member then can pass out like they've done before, fall back, hit their head, rush the scene, go to grab the person. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. I mean, it becomes very chaotic. So I do. And even that, like, look for yourself. That's
all I can think of is that I don't know his experience, his age. I mean, There's not any great excuse. Obviously, you would like to think that he could kind of think on his feet a little better, but also, I mean, who knows? I think he was probably taken aback.
And if the mindset's not right, if someone just is on scene, they're like, oh, I'll look around, see if they're here, not preparing. Yeah. And then, like you're saying, then they go, and it's almost like, well, look for yourself. I don't know. That's tough.
Right. So, there wasn't a whole lot to see initially, but upon further investigation, so police obviously get there. They go in to find Cheryl in her room. She is on her waterbed again. Remember the times, guys. This is 1995. If you are a bit of a younger buck and don't know much about a waterbed, it's just what it's called, right? So you've got this thick, like a vinyl, which is like a vinyl.
Like a world's biggest gallon-sized Ziploc bag full of water, basically.
Yeah, so big, clunky wooden frame, but the mattress itself is like that, like a plasticky vinyl, whatever. And literally a hose hooks to it, fills it up with water. So as you lay in it, you're moving up and down, whatever, right? Like kind of going with the flow there. But Cheryl was in her waterbed. She had her nightgown on, covers on. She was lying face down. And investigation will reveal that her cause of death was blunt force trauma. She had been beaten or bludgeoned to the face and neck, head about 10 times. She had separately like 4 bruises to her cheek, like separate from what she had been hit with, and some marks to her fingers. So the interesting thing here is that in her bedroom, like I told you, she was on the waterbed. Well, it has a temperature control. So think of a heating pad or an electric blanket. Waterbeds you could purchase. Some came with them. Some were like an aftermarket, like essentially like a bladder, right? Like a water bladder that would then have like a remote with the temperature control on it. And her waterbed was set to the highest heat setting. Now, granted, this was February. but the highest heat setting was that of a pretty high heat, like generally speaking, not what you would be sleeping on. And so thoughts or speculation have always been that whomever did that the idea was to increase decomposition, the rate of decomposition of the body, or at least not because it would be that long before she was found, but maybe to skew when it looked like things happened to her. Okay. So again, the waterbed was turned to the highest heat. She was lying on her stomach. So she was face down, had been bludgeoned. And then on the wall of the bedroom, and I will put these photos on Andrea Uplate on Instagram. You can always see our cases and the photos that we present on the live YouTube show. If you're an audio listener, you can go back to Instagram and see them there. But they're on the wall of the bedroom were painted the words die and then B-I-T, as though it were to say bitch, but it didn't. It just said die B-I-T. Okay. And this was in like a beige paint on the bedroom. It was like a whitish beige paint on the bedroom wall. So investigators did take the wall, like they cut it out and took it, like that panel of wall goes to trial, right? So there was that. Then moving forward horrifically as they go through the home to the children's bedrooms, they get to Tyler. So 6-year-old Tyler's bedroom. Tyler, unfortunately, had met the same fate as his mother, and he had also been bludgeoned with what appeared to be the same instrument. He was deceased, same cause of death. He was also lying face down on his bed. Now, Tyler had a pillow, his little Mickey Mouse pillow, over his head. And we talk about that often. Now, his cause of death was not asphyxiation, so the pillow did not contribute to his cause of death. What's the common thing that there's a couple of reasons that people are generally covered up in a murder scene.
A lot of times it's like remorse, like they did it and then they go, I don't want to have to stare at what I just did. Like I said, remorse.
Right.
Especially like in a home like that. Out in the wild kind of thing, it could be concealment for
buy
time. But like in a home like that, some people would say it's that the person who did the killing sort of regrets what they did, or just does not want to have to see the face of the person they just did that to.
Which not always, right? But often can point to a family member, can point to a loved one. Because they've done this thing that they don't want to be reminded of. Now, not always. People hear like stabbing. They're like, oh, it's a crime of passion. Well, not necessarily, right? Like, so this isn't always, a blanket statement, but it is something to keep in mind. It's, again, we always talk about like it's a piece of the puzzle that he could have not had a pillow over his head, but he did. So, there are some things that could potentially indicate. All right. So then they go down the hallway to baby Jennifer's room. Remember, the baby was 18 months old. And here's where, again, there were discrepancies. A lot of these cases, and when I say older cases, I'm saying like prior to the year 2000 or prior to even 2010, because time goes by quickly. The way we document things changes quickly. The way things are reported, now it's like online and it's like a dandelion seed that they go everywhere immediately. Before it was handwritten, it was called into a paper. It was things were reported on differently. And so if something was written once, it could be written one time and then reported on continuously for years incorrectly. And we've seen that in multiple cases. So there was a lot of discrepancy at first that potentially the baby had a shoestring around her neck. It was not a shoestring. It was actually a cord from one of the blinds in the home. So it was a blind cord had actually been wrapped around the baby. Now, this is a very interesting point. It's something that Brian and I have talked about. We often don't talk about these cases a whole lot before we present them to you guys. This one we did a little bit though, because this one intrigued me like from a medical standpoint, and then like just trying to look at it from the sociology or psychopathy of whoever did this, what their reasoning might be behind it. Because I'm not sure that I've heard of a case quite where the death happened quite like this, but with the baby, the blind cord was actually not wrapped around her neck, I think, as you would generally assume, for like an asphyxiation purpose. Her mouth was open, and the blind cord was like around her open mouth and then across her neck, so as to, in fact, push into the vasculature in her neck to actually decrease and eventually cease blood flow to her brain, rather than asphyxiation, which would be to cease breathing, right? To cut off her airway. This was actually to cease the blood flow to her brain. So that's actually how she died. It was wrapped in, you'll read reports where it says a blind cord or a shoestring was tied around her neck. Ultimately, same idea, right? Like she died by something wrapped around her. I understand, like, ultimately speaking, it really doesn't matter, but it does in terms of the investigation, because it is a very interesting way to have done this. An 18-month-old is big enough to kind of, obviously stand, push back, fight. But you would think, at least when my brain gets into it, is that, she's going to cry or scream or make a lot of noise. So you would think something that causes her mouth to remain open would not be generally what we're doing, unless she was the last one that we came to, right? The last one potentially to have died. And then now it doesn't matter because no one else is awake in the home. And if you are a stranger to the home, you may wonder if there's anybody else in the home, right? Would you know that? Would you know that? Maybe if you've cased the whole home, but
yeah.
I mean, I guess that's something to consider. Like, if we're doing it that way, and it doesn't matter if she cries because her mouth's open, because she's the last one to die, you've got to be pretty fully, having knowledge that she is the last one to die, like that there is no one else in the home. And if you're a stranger, you may not fully be secure in that thought, right? I mean,
yeah, because you would have to clear the entire house and make sure everyone is there. And if you have been watching the house, you would know there's usually a man there as well. And maybe you're watching it and he leaves, and so that's the reason you kick it off that night. But either way, yeah. I mean, usually you wouldn't want the mouth open. I think that's what you're saying. It's like you would.
Yeah, I mean,
which is one of the reasons when I said that about, I asked you if maybe the child had done that themselves by accident.
Which was a fantastic question. Yeah. So Brian's first question with that was, well, do you know where the blind cord came from? Could it have come from blinds over her crib? And we know that that's, if you don't know it and you're a parent of a young child, keep blind cords, any kind of cords that hang, drapery cords, tied up at the very top of the blinds or the curtains at all times. I mean, even with a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, kids do silly things. They put things around their neck to jump off beds and try to fly. They do crazy things, and very, very terrible things have happened by accident many, many times. But that was a good question, because had she, let's say she got herself tangled, which sadly happens. And then that was potentially enough to cause someone, a family member, let's say a loved one, to snap and go rogue on the family or something, right? But as best I know, it was actually a cut cord. Like, the blind cord had been cut. And I say think because there's just not, I can't find autopsy without a FOIA. You could FOIA this stuff, but this is not a case I was necessarily interested in doing that with. But you can't find a whole lot of police reports, autopsy reports, these kinds of things on this case, whereas you can on some. But excuse me, to my knowledge, I think that blind cord had actually been cut and was from a different set of blinds and not something over the baby's crib. So I don't think it was an accidental, on her part getting tangled in. But that's a fantastic question. So this is the scene that we have. Okay, so we've talked about Cheryl, the waterbed, the words in paint on her bedroom wall, and then we talked about Tyler, again bludgeoned, the pillow over his head, and then the baby with the blind cord around her mouth and vasculature of her neck. So as police go through the home, obviously we have a horrible crime that has taken place. It's shut down as a crime scene immediately, and this is about the time that Jon is now calling for police. So he says, I called my mom and I called police to go do a welfare check. And my mom had a key to the house, so I wanted her to go out and check. We don't have an account per court records of when his mother ever actually got to the home. But the best reporting I've seen has shown that I believe it was Jon's father that called him with the news of his family. But by this time of the morning, by the time the police get there and see this scene, they're not very interested in taking a lot of phone calls from Jon. He does eventually get there. His car is seized pretty much immediately. You know, he's taken into questioning. Obviously, he's the husband. His best alibi was that he was asleep. So, that makes sense. He's taken in to be talked to. But they're at the home. Let's talk about what the home looked like. So we have the bludgeoning, for instance. It looks like the best case between investigators and the coroner could surmise that it looked like that from potentially a metal pipe with about a 1/2 inch diameter, I believe is what they say. This has never been found. So whatever was used to actually beat Cheryl and Tyler with has never been found, that murder weapon. Okay. But they best deem it to be something that appears to be like a metal pipe. So the back door was kicked in. Or was it? It was at least made to look like it was kicked in. We've visited another case like this before, actually a couple. Mm-hmm. But one that always stands out to me is going to be Ellen Greenberg, because we got Sam Goldberg talking about the door being, he had to kick the door in to get to her. And we have a similar scenario here, because the back door, while it on first glance seems to be kicked in, as in it's open, the screw plate is off of the wall onto the floor, the screws are onto the floor, and there is a footprint on the door. However, Rita, a lady named Rita, was one of the investigators during this time, and she'll talk about it, and she'll say the screws had no pulp on them. They had no meat on them. Those were her words. And what she means by that is that these screws actually appeared to have been unscrewed from the wall. They were clean. They were shiny, clean screws. So if you're renovating, take this opportunity to do some true crime podcast investigating, kick a door in, see what happens, because when the screws aren't going to come out of wood, out of a door frame or facing, right, unless they are unscrewed cleanly, if they are pulled straight out, they're going to have some kind of, like she said, pulp or meat, wood markings on them, wood, left over, some sawdust, something on the screws. So the screw plate had fallen to the floor, but the screws lying on the floor were clean. The door itself was without damage. Mm-hmm. So you can put your foot on the door, render a footprint, unscrew screws, drop that screw plate, let the door kind of fall, and now it looks like it's been kicked in. So that was going on with the back door. But do you remember when I told you that Teresa got to the home that morning? What did I tell you about the front door? It was unlocked.
Oh, it was unlocked.
Yeah.
I thought it was painted.
Well, that as well.
Yeah, but unlocked. Yeah.
Yep. The glass on the panels of the front door was painted strange. It was also unlocked, but the back door is kicked in. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to kick in a door and risk waking people up, presumably they're all in their beds when they're found murdered, but it didn't wake anybody up. A mom home alone with a baby and a small child. I can tell you that being home alone with 2 children over many, many years of my life, I could hear somebody's whistling walking down the street 2 blocks away, I think.
Well, that also means there's 3 people
who didn't wake up.
Who did not wake up. You could have the world's heaviest sleeper, maybe sleep through something like that, but 3 different people.
Yeah. And I mean, I would argue to say this is before everybody had a sound machine, right? Like, I can't say no one did, but I feel like in 1995, not most babies are going to bed with sound machines,
right,
kind of like they have been in the past couple of decades, right? So that's the back door. Let's talk about the car. So Cheryl's car, it was found in the garage where it should be, right? So items were claimed to have been stolen from the house, but many of the items were found in the trunk of Cheryl's car in the garage. And the car had a battery, like a battery pack connected to it, as though to charge the battery, right? But upon investigation, they learned that the battery to Cheryl's car did not need charging. Like the battery pack was hooked up, but not on. Okay, so it's not like it had completed its job and now her battery is charged. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't on, and her battery was fully charged. All right. So this is all very interesting. And these are very specific things to take the time to do. Look, we've talked about it though. We've look at Bill and Peggy Stevenson. We've talked about plenty of cases where scenes are kind of set up a certain kind of way and people take time after the fact of a murder. That definitely happens, but these are interesting things. So things are like technically stolen, but put in the trunk of Cheryl's car, and then a battery pack is attached to it, but the battery's not dead. So now I will tell you that I won't say her name, but I worked with someone not too long ago who gave the story, who lives in a nice neighborhood, a nice home, and usually people are not broken into on their street. And their home a few years ago was broken into. And a very interesting thing happened when she woke up terrifyingly in the middle of the night to someone standing at the foot of her bed after they had been crawling around the bed that she and her husband were in to obtain things from the nightstand and like look around in the dark. He stands up, she sits up. They have a moment where they stare at each other. He runs out. She's chasing after. It's a whole thing. You find out there's someone else in the home. So there's two intruders. They've got children. The whole thing. They run out. They're eventually apprehended. Whatever. Police get there. But when they do, they find that all of these belongings that had been taken from her home, because they'd been in there for a while, were in her car in the driveway. Because the plan then was that they were going to grab those keys and just drive her car out. And that was the final thing they were going to steal. So when I read this case, that's kind of the first thing I thought about. Like, okay, it could be that they're stealing items using Cheryl's car as a mode to transport the items that are being stolen. The battery pack is weird. The potential staged kicked in door is weird. The painted glass on the front door is weird.
It was the noise then.
Oh, yeah. So, I don't know. So I can explain maybe the stolen items in the trunk, but that's just about it. So that's kind of what the home looks like. So I think that a big problem that people had around town at this time, and if you are listening and you do remember this case, you live around that area, please let me know if you can kind of corroborate this. But it sounds like, so he gets home, some time goes by, and between the time that he gets home, meaning Jon, he's questioned, about a year goes by before he's actually indicted on the murders of Cheryl and his wife and his two children. And during all of this time, Jon is back in the home. He's living there. Sources will say that he did not have cleaning services come, did not actually properly clean up any blood that was there staining the areas where the murders took place. He drove his red little convertible around town, hit up his local haunts pretty frequently. He was at happy hour weekly. All of the things that he had been doing prior to the murders, he was doing there, living in the home, doing it. And that really did kind of rub people the wrong way. Because they'd say, "What? How in the world, can you go back to the home where your entire family was murdered?" And people do all kinds of wild things. But that is something. So he gets defense attorney Sean Escanosi. So Sean actually has an interesting history of his own. So prior to this, he kind of had he did some wrestling. He dabbled in all sorts of things and becomes eventually a defense attorney. I will say that he represented Jon Feeney. They go through this trial over the course of a few months. We'll talk about the verdict, and it's all said and done. And now, or at least not too long following the trial, Sean goes on and steps down from being a defense attorney and makes specialty high-end chocolates. So he's kind of had a colored career. Yeah, for sure. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about what people will say in terms of Jon's reputation around town. So this was where it got a little bit Days of Our Lives. If you're a youngin', that was an old soap opera. But basically, think any of the rumor mill or gossip around town. It kind of all of that came to fruition at trial, because it seems that everyone kind of in town, at least a lot of his coworkers, a lot of his students, knew his proclivities, and this was toward flirting. It was toward being a philanderer, if you will. And so he initially, Jon, denied any accounts of affairs or extramarital, anything on either of their parts leading up to all this. But he had to be confronted with the truth and then admit to it. And there were no less than 4 women who were called in to testify during the trial that they had sexual relationships with Jon Feeney. Most of them over the years of like 91 to 92. Again, these murders took place in 95. The most recent of which, though, was Pam. If you remember, that was his colleague that he was at dinner with the first night that he was at the resort for the teachers' conference. So where it gets really kind of is a lot of these women, if I'm not mistaken, at least 3 out of the 4 had to tell their husbands within hours of them testifying, because they're about to have to say it under oath that they had been having these affairs with Jon. You guys, you're going to see pictures of Jon. So there was one student who talks, actually, there were many students, because we'll hear from a lot of the teenagers there at the high school who talk about his flirtatious behavior with the girls. They talk about him calling one of the girls one time at her house, and the first question he had for the girl was, "Are you naked?" Multiple former female students will say that he would do this thing where, like, between classes and like when a new class was like filing in to start, he would tell the girls, "Hey, remain in your seats," and he would call the boys up, and he'd have his computer open, or I guess I'm not sure if it was a laptop, but he'd have his computer turned on and have the boys gathered around his desk, and they'd all be kind of covering their mouths and pointing and laughing and smiling, to the point that while the girls never saw what they were looking at, they all corroborate the fact that it seemed like it was probably something inappropriate in nature, something to do with women. And they did. More than one girl has recounted that she heard one time when they were all gathered around looking at his computer, a girl stepped in from the hallway to say hello, and one of the boys looking at Jon Feeney's computer pointed at her and was like, "Oh, that was the girl in the bathing suit on that picture." So potentially they were looking at pictures of girls from the school. He was known to have gone to different outings and parties that the kids had, like the teenagers had. He had been known on more than a few occasions to supply alcohol to the teenagers. Other adults that he worked with, colleagues, will state that he was just kind of casual, laid back in nature. They really didn't have anything negative to say about his personality or his demeanor, but almost all of them will say they didn't really know much about Cheryl. Now, in Cheryl's defense as well, her own mother will say that she was kind of a wallflower. She was strong. She's kind of like the strong and silent type, right? She was very smart. She was astute. She climbed the ladder at her job. She was a very devoted mother. But she wasn't one to go out and make waves and be this big, bubbly, jovial personality. That just wasn't Cheryl. But it sounds like if you were a coworker of Jon's, you really wouldn't know much about her either, because he would talk about his kids, and they all, meaning his students that all were either questioned or talked to during and after the fact, and his adult peers and colleagues would say the same thing, that he really just didn't speak much. He didn't say anything bad about Cheryl. He just didn't really talk about her much, which is fine. But, you and I have talked about this. Like, it's interesting when you work closely, when you're working many hours out of the week with someone and you know that they are married, and you're talking about being sick with a cold and coming back in, or you're talking about your dog having an accident on the carpet, or your kids doing this, you just generally mention your spouse. You talk about them. And so when you know someone's married and they never mention that spouse, it's always just a little, if they talk about other things at home and not that person, it's always a little interesting, right? But I guess Jon didn't really speak of Cheryl much. Now, there are other accounts that he had said, actually to multiple people, had kind of given the idea that he had never even really wanted kids. But he did speak favorably of Tyler for sure, and sometimes of baby Jennifer, but he had let it be known to some folks that he had not actually wanted kids. But again, didn't really speak much of Cheryl at all. He was known to play a game called, I think it's Vampire the Masquerade. Evidently, this is kind of like a role game, like a tabletop role game, where you can like be different characters and whatever. I could care less. However, we've talked about this ad nauseum, I think, around, we're into 95 at this point, but definitely in the 80s into the early 90s, the whole satanic panic and whatever. So the prosecution used him playing this game as part of kind of a character statement, if you will, or a character profile on him. The problem with the prosecution here is that a couple of things, and we went back and forth on this or spoke about this, but I find it interesting because when they decided to indict him, they indicted him on all 3 murders. So like, Jon Feeney, you have been charged with the murder of your wife, Cheryl, and your 2 children. So when he went to trial that one time, it was in the case of 3 murders. So as a homicide lieutenant formerly, I mean, how frequently does something like that happen, or would you generally try to separate them and charge individually?
I mean, you would normally charge for all of them because you would assume if he killed one, he killed all of them.
Sure.
Like you and I were talking about with circumstantial cases, if you do that, that's it. You get that one shot. You get one shot. And I think that a lot of people get frustrated and mad about that. But like we were on the beach talking about it, and it's kind of good because what it does is it forces detectives and prosecutors. You don't run around just charging people with murder.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't do it for anything. I don't care if it's shoplifting. You don't just run around and just charge someone because you think it's them. It's like you can prove it. So the idea of that, I think that was maybe the gamble there was, hey, we think he did all. I mean, we think he did all 3 because the way it went down. So we're charging with all 3 and let's go. It's all circumstantial.
Right. And so that puts me into my next point precisely. It was all circumstantial. So the prosecution did not have a strong case in terms of these charges. And I agree. I feel like this is one that, and I mean, it's hindsight, right? Like the prosecutor will probably say now the same thing, but like you charge for one on this kind of weak circumstantial case, no matter how convicted you are that he did it, there's not a lot you can bring to a jury, unfortunately. So you do one, you can see where the defense pokes holes in your case, and you can kind of reconvene, strap up your boots again, and get ready for charge number 2, and hopefully come at it with something a little bit better, or by then maybe something else has come forward, okay? So all the prosecution really had to go off of was the fact that we have the bit of a discrepancy where he said that he had done nothing until 11 o'clock on the morning of the 26th, when they have the timestamp for the McDonald's receipt at 6:59 that morning. They want to point toward his philandering, right? So his extramarital affairs as a character flaw and as kind of like his motive, because he wants to leave the marriage. He just wants to live this free life. So he's going to do this. And then they look at the fact that he had increased Cheryl's insurance policy just 4 months prior, in that September of 94, another $250,000. Okay. So he was set to gain, when it was all said and done with assets and insurance, about $500,000. What you need to know, though, is that between his teaching gig and Cheryl's nursing job, they had been putting away money since they were an early dating and early married couple. They were very comfortable. So they weren't in high demand of money. They weren't short of anything. Not that, it's not that anybody wouldn't want more money, but this doesn't seem to be the case where he had just like put her at $3 million 2 nights before her murder. You know what I mean? This was and in fact, actually, if you look at it, you've got to be careful because people will make things sound a certain kind of way. And when it sounds like, oh, he just, he increased her insurance a few months prior. Well, when you really look into that, what had happened was the school that he worked at and the insurance company that they use had actually had a special offer for certain educators that they would, on, kind of for shorter points, increase the monetary value of life insurance policies. And so they were kind of offered a special deal. So a lot of teachers partook in that arrangement in the months prior. So it's not something he went out individually and did on his own.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying he didn't commit the murders, but I don't think the life insurance was necessarily anything to do with it. But that's all the prosecution really had, was the fact that he had these extramarital affairs and he had increased Cheryl's life insurance policy earnings. Okay. And then they would sprinkle in that Vampire the Masquerade game to say that he liked to play this weird killing game. You guys, it's not enough. It's not strong enough. And so we talk about it often, but there are plenty of cases where sadly you can look at it, you can have other evidence, and it's just not what it takes to convict this man. So that's exactly what happened. He was put on trial for the three. The jury, I believe it was 8 men and 4 women, deliberated for about 5 hours, and they came back with the charge of not guilty. Now, they will all say that at the beginning, I feel like a majority said that he was guilty. There were some that were indifferent. After talking for a little bit, by the time it was said and done, pretty much all of them said, when they were asked independently, like, oh yeah, I think for sure he did it. Mm-hmm. They're like, but there's no way we could, like, per our constitutional law, the prosecution didn't make a case to try. Like, we couldn't convict him. Mm-hmm. They didn't prove their case. And they're right. Like, there was no hard evidence. Now, there's other things we can look at that are interesting. So I will say that on Cheryl's bloody bathrobe, there were 2 hairs found that were reddish brown in color. Now, they will say they didn't belong to Jon Feeney, but they will also say that these weren't even properly necessarily tested, to the point when I look back at my old notes from the first time I covered this case, evidently there were musings that it looked like potentially the fibers from the carpet of his red Mustang, which makes me obviously ask the question, did we not differentiate whether or not they were even human hairs? There are no sources that show anywhere any kind of testing that was done in the sense of other than it just didn't seem to be Jon Feeney's. There was a gray hair found on a paintbrush in the home. The gray hair was not deemed to be Jon Feeney's. We don't know who the gray hair came from. There was a fingerprint on the light bulb in the garage. The light bulb had been unscrewed, and these fingerprints were not deemed to be Jon Feeney's. Now, when I say that, I need you to also know that fingerprints were not taken from baby Jennifer's crib, from little Tyler's bed frame. So we don't even have any fingerprints taken at all from 2 areas, like 2 of the crime scene areas where these children died. Okay. Mm-hmm. We have the paint. Remember, paint was spelled out the words die, B-I-T, bit, on Cheryl's bedroom wall. In the garage, a paint can with that same color paint had been knocked over, and throughout the home were painted footsteps, right? So like as though you had stepped in the spilled paint and walked through the home. Now, the defense will argue that those shoe prints were from that of a size 11 shoe, and Jon Feeney wore a size 12. You can find like 2.5 different sizes of shoes in my closet right now because it depends on the shoe, on the sale.
I just thought
how much
about
I like it.
I wear two different size Vans.
100% you do. Your tie-ons
my
and
slip-ons and my tie-ons are 2 different sizes.
Yeah. So this one size discrepancy to me does not a strong defense make, but of course they use it. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But get this, the painted footprints, like I said, as though you had stepped in it and walked through the carpet. This was a carpeted home, right? It was 95. So you're walking through carpet in the whole house. The deal with that is that as the footprints go on, the paint marks, like the paint imprints of the soles of the shoe, does not decrease. So think naturally, if you step in paint that you just spilled, first of all, you're not like dipping your whole shoe in it, right? You've spilled paint, you accidentally step in it some. First of all, it's not going to be even. Generally speaking, it's not that your left and right shoe have both fully planted in this paint you spilled. One foot hits it, you kind of jump, right?
Yeah.
But in this scenario, evidently, both feet fully stepped in this spilled paint, and as it goes across the carpet, the paint does not decrease. Okay? So it has the same amount of paint on the shoe print at the very end of the carpet as it did when it started. And that's not the norm. So obviously that looks as though someone has dipped a shoe print, a shoe sole in paint and put it down. Put it down, right? Like a stamp.
Yeah.
Okay. More and more, everything comes back to looking like a scene was set, like it was staged to look as though someone had broken in. So get this. I told you about those screws, right? Where that door was supposed to have been kicked in and the screw plate fell and the screws had fallen out. The screws were clean. They didn't have any wood on them. It looked as though actually they had been unscrewed rather than kicked in. So get this. Jon Feeney had an office inside the home. In his office, he had file cabinets and all these files. So when they talk about the home looking like it had been ravaged or ransacked, his files were out of the file cabinets. However, first of all, if I'm going in there to brutally murder a woman and 2 children, I don't know what I need with the high school chemistry teacher's files in his office.
Need the recipe for meth. Maybe that.
And so these files, however, had been ransacked. Like, this sounds like I'm watching like Die Hard or something. Like, I don't know. Like, they just come in and they're just,
Yeah.
But instead, his files were in alphabetical order. They were still in the order they were in the filing cabinets, like in stacks neatly in front of the filing cabinet. Mm-hmm. Well, do you remember I told you that as soon as Jon Feeney came home and during the indictment and before all this, he lived in the home. He came back home to live. He said, this is my home. This is where I'm going to be. So it is, it does behoove him for things to not be too messy, right? So he can kind of just put things back where they need to go, just in case, right? So that's something.
Let me say something real quick.
Yeah.
About burglaries and how things look and staged burglaries. Mm-hmm. I don't have a huge experience in burglaries except being a patrol officer responding, and I did have one time. Long story short, it was staged, but that's how you could tell it was staged, because everything was open. You know what I mean? Like all the drawers, all the cabinets, like in the kitchen. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there's certain times, maybe like drug dealer versus drug dealer, and they think the stash is in the kitchen. But a lot of times it's overkill. It's everything is opened, clothing is thrown out. I don't know. It has a very specific look when you see it and you're like, this doesn't look
right.
Doesn't look legit.
Makes sense. So that was interesting about the filing cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
Also, remember I told you he got that speeding ticket at, after 8:00, the first night he was gone when he was out with Pam getting dinner. So I told you that was a body cam documented traffic stop. So this is important because at the time, as many people did, Jon Feeney wore a woven belt. Do you remember those belts, you guys? I remember my brothers had them that were like the woven leather. You'd wrap it under, tie it under. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
So, excuse me. So in that documented traffic stop with body cam, excuse me, Jon Feeney was wearing his woven belt. Evidently, he wore this daily. It was just part of his, his daily clothing. Well, when police search the home, when they get there and find the scene there, on the table. So remember, I referenced Rita, the woman who was one of the investigators earlier on. She's gone on to become a defense attorney, and she talks about this case still. She says that there in the home on the kitchen counter was Jon's woven belt, and it was rolled up. So when you talk to any of his friends and family, that's what he would do. He comes home, takes his belt off, he rolls it up and puts it down on the counter. That was his daily pattern. We just talked about patterns, right? So that was there. It was also there on the traffic stop body cam the night before.
Car camera. Before all the nerds chime in and say, they didn't have body camera.
Oh, yeah, car camera.
Car camera. Y'all know what we're talking about.
But how did the car camera show his belt? I guess he had to get out of the car. Maybe he got out.
Probably when he got out. Either his shirt's tucked in and you can see there's no.
No, I get that. I guess I wasn't picturing him getting out since it was a speeding ticket, but I guess he got out. That's what I'm saying, body camera. Okay, you're right. Your dash cam. Cam. So he got out, but he had on the woven belt when he got pulled over. Again, there was one there at the home. But when Jon Feeney came home from the conference to the scene, to this news that his family was gone, He did not have on a belt, nor was one found in any of his possessions. That's something that did not come up in court. So there were a few things that did not come up in court. A lot of it was his relations with students, these types of things. And that belt, to me, that's one of the bigger smoking guns than most of the things. That's less circumstantial than pretty much anything I feel like the prosecution brought to the case. So I told you they deliberated for 5 hours, and they came back again with the not guilty verdict. And that's that. So another thing, though, that has been a huge point of confusion and sadness for everyone that is aware of this is that upon the autopsy, little 6-year-old Tyler was actually found to have hepatitis B. So hepatitis B is a bloodborne pathogen. It is only transferred through blood and body fluids. All right. So yes, if you get in a Reddit rabbit hole, everyone likes to say that he could have shared a toothbrush with someone, and if your gums bleed, sure, that's fine. It's not often that your gums bleed and my gums bleed, and I'm getting hepatitis from you. That's a very minimal, yes, it can happen, a minimal way that hepatitis B is transferred. Okay. You can look at IV drug use or any needle stick. Obviously, if someone has been infected and then it gets to you, people argue that Cheryl was a nurse. That's fine. Here's the deal. Cheryl did not have hepatitis B. So once they realized that Tyler did, now I hate to report on this because it's not highly corroborated. I can't, since I didn't have the autopsy report, but I will say that hepatitis B is not generally looked for or tested for in an autopsy, particularly one of a known cause of death. We know his cause of death was murder. It wasn't a natural cause, right? So it was murder. You're not going to look for Hep B in the 6-year-old. It wouldn't really matter. That's not what he died from. So there are some reports that upon assessing for the autopsy, the coroner found liver damage, which then prompted him to test for any hepatic disease. I don't know whether or not that's true. I don't know whether or not Tyler had liver damage. Either way, we do know that he was tested and he did show that he was positive for hepatitis B. Where this gets incredibly interesting, though, is that neither Cheryl nor Jon had hepatitis B. So he did not get it from his mother or father. Now, sadly, there were some indications upon the autopsy that show physically that Tyler had likely suffered from sexual abuse. There was some scarring. There were some other things that were going on. And a teacher has corroborated that Tyler had gone through a phase where he would tug at his shorts kind of uncomfortably, and that sometimes he had been found to defecate in the closet. These are some things that you pay attention to if you work with kids, some things that are just kind of not the norm that they can start doing that kind of get your radar up a little bit. And so unfortunately with that autopsy finding, we have learned this. Now, this is where people, I will say, definitely get it wrong because I say people because I've read so much of it, have jumped to say, well, then clearly the killer had Hep B and that's who did this. And Jon didn't have Hep B, so he couldn't have done. That has nothing to do with the price of tea in China. Okay, like that. We don't know who the killer was. The killer didn't give Tyler Hep B the night that Tyler died. It takes a minimum of 9 weeks to show up on a blood test. That's not something that would have shown up 48 hours later in an autopsy. Okay, so I'm not saying that who did this couldn't have been the one that at some point had given him that, but that's not what happened that night of Tyler's death. Okay, and then sadly we've done this enough. And you've probably heard enough stories to know that while it's a horrible reality, something could have been going on with Tyler from a loved one, a family friend, someone at school, someone at the playground, anything. It could have been going on with Jon and someone else gave him Hep B. We don't know Tyler's full medical history. When he was born, he could have maybe needed an IV for dehydration when he was 3 months old and got a bad stick and got hepatitis B from that. We don't know. So I will say it's erroneously reported that he had sexually transmitted hepatitis B. I say that because look, sadly, it probably was. But you can't say that definitively because you can't look at a positive Hep B test and know how someone got it. Okay. So sadly, it probably was with the corroboration of the physical findings on the autopsy, right? But we don't really know that. Either way, I don't think this includes or excludes Jon as a suspect in their death. I think it could be related to or fully something completely separate. But that is something that obviously is a big hang up for people. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything here in my notes because a lot of times we hang up for the night and I'll say, oh, I forgot to say that one thing. So now another thing that I talked on the first time I covered the case was that a lot of people around town just Jon didn't sit well with them in the way, like I said, he conducted himself after the murders. He did stay in the home. He lived there. They say that he never painted, like I told you earlier, over the bloodstains that were present in the home, and he continued to sleep in the same waterbed. I mean, I can't judge someone for what they do after a tragedy. Also, it's tough though, right? It's not your norm. They say he kept the cat that was said to have fed on the family. So the cat's an interesting one. Think about this, you guys. We talked about potentially the scene being set to look like staged to look like this break-in. They had a cat. Tyler was allergic to this cat. Okay, little 6-year-old Tyler. So the cat was pretty much made to stay in this one room of the house. There it had its food, its litter box, its little bed, whatever. And it pretty much lived in this one room. Everyone in the family, and you've always had there's always that one pet, you can't let it out or it'll try to get out or whatever. They knew that this cat, bless you, they knew that this cat couldn't be let out. So when investigators get there, while files have been removed from filing cabinets, items have potentially been stolen, paint has been spilled, and all these things have gone on in the house that it's supposed to be looking like it's ransacked. The door to where the cat was in the bedroom was shut, and the cat was in there. So if this is a stranger, potentially you've got a baby, you've kicked in a door, not woken up anyone. If what the scene is to portray is true. Kicked in a door, didn't wake up anyone. You let the baby scream because we talked in detail on the manner of her death, and that included her mouth being open, so she could have been screaming. But if you're doing that, then you have to be certain that no one else is in the house that could wake up. But now you've got a door that either you didn't check at all, or you opened it, a cat runs out, you put the cat back in and shut the door because that's what you're concerned about. It's very odd. Some more odd things take place over that time. I told you he lives there. Eventually, it took a while, but eventually Jon Feeney leaves. He moves to Ecuador. He teaches some classes there. He got married. I believe he's since gotten divorced, but he got married. They had a daughter there in Ecuador. But a reporter that had been following this case at some point shows up to see Jon Feeney and hang with him. And they go on this road trip. And he documents his time with Jon. It wasn't too long after the murders. And he documents his time with him. They go drinking. They're at all these bars. And when this reporter is asked about Jon's demeanor, he says, oh, he was a lovely guy. He's very funny. He didn't indicate anything about the murders, didn't proclaim any guilt or anything. There was no drunken bar confession. But, the thing that strikes at every turn, there's never how dare you charge me in the death of my beloved wife and children? Or how dare you suck up a year's worth of time after this when you could be finding the person who did this? You just wasted all this time and resources in prosecuting me when whoever did this to my family, you're punching holes in police station walls, right? You're mad. You know what I mean? There's no vitriol. There's no emotion with it. Everything was, you got the wrong guy. But none of it was a proactive, can you find the guy who killed my family? I'm going to lose my mind until you find, I won't ever be able to sleep until you find this person, or else I'll find him. There's never been any of that. And I think that to me, that speaks more heavily than just, I didn't do it.
Do you know another case similar to this? 1994, I think, was the movie Fugitive. Remember that movie?
Oh, I was going to say OJ, but go ahead.
Well, okay, too. So yeah, OJ, a lot of similarities. And The Fugitive was a movie, I think it was 94.
It's a great movie. I think so.
Tommy Lee Jones.
Oh, yeah.
Who's that other? Harrison
Ford. Who's that other?
That movie was based on a TV show, The Fugitive.
Mm-hmm.
That show, from like the 60s, I think.
Yeah.
That show was based on a real case. Dr. Sam Shepard. He gets charged in like 1954 with the murder of his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And in The Fugitive, I think it's like a one-armed man or something, like a prosthetic arm or something. But the Sam Shepard case was basically like a guy with a bushy hair, if I remember right, like an army jacket or something, or green jacket, whatever. He says, "Hey, I didn't kill my wife." He gets charged with murder. It becomes a circus, and then goes all the way. He's found guilty in 54. Mm-hmm. Goes all the way to Supreme Court. Supreme Court's like, you didn't get a fair trial. So they go back and retry him, and then he's found not guilty.
Okay.
He later becomes a professional wrestler. His name is Killer Sam Shepard. And his move is like the mandibular something with the jaw. He grabs you in the jaw and hits a nerve. Later in life, Mick Foley, a.k.a. Mankind, a.k.a. Cactus Jack, a.k.a. Dude Love, uses that same move and just renames it the mandible jaw or something. Isn't that crazy?
Which part?
How similar it is, like, to this case.
It's crazy how you wrap everything back to wrestling.
Oh, I didn't do that. Sam Shepard did when he went on that career of becoming a professional wrestler. But when I was in high school, criminal justice teacher told us that he was asked when he was close to dying if he did it, if he really did it. And he made some like Yoda thing, like, well, you'll never know or something. Right? But then in 97, I think, his son has his body exhumed. And they do some kind of DNA testing and supposedly find out he was not the killer, supposedly. I don't know. That's a crazy case. But there's similarities. And who does that remind you of? Who does that case remind you of?
OJ.
No. Who else? That son of a bitch is guilty?
Oh, yeah, McDonald.
Yes. Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
Very similar. Jeffrey McDonald's who we're talking about. Not Michael McDonald. He's just saying.
Oh my gosh. Davey says it's the mandible claw. If you guys are listening to the audio podcast and you're not here in our chats or watching my face during all of that just happened, you can tell clearly even just by listening that we are starting to wrap up the show because Brian's getting silly and we've now started talking about wrestling. But yeah, I do think it's interesting that we can hem and haw all day long about whether or not it seems like he did it or not or whatever. Yeah. But ultimately, I'm not seeing any vitriol. I'm not seeing any like visceral response of like find who did this or and we talked about it earlier. But you guys, if you remember 95, I mean, that's a heavy hitter of a year for all the talk shows. You've got Oprah, Barbara Walters,
all of them. Yeah.
We talked about it earlier. Katie Couric, you got
Sally Jesse,
everyone.
Ricky Lake.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of like more like journalism type, like at the time, like a Katie Couric, I'm seeing a
60 Minutes.
All of them. So you'd think he'd be charged with found not guilty, and then he's going to go on the talk show circuit, or at least on one of them. Because they'll pay him, they'll do whatever, and he's going to show them, big tears. And I don't know why. I don't know why they wasted all this time. Why haven't they found? Can someone help me find who did this to my family? I can hardly go to bed at night. No, he's going to happy hour and sleeping in the waterbed where his wife was bludgeoned to death. It's just
they had means too. I will say this: there have been families that have had to stay in the same place.
He had no reason.
But he had money. Yeah, all of it. It's also just that lesson of too. They charge within a year. I'm kind of criticizing in the sense, and we talked about it at the beach. Like, if time's on your side,
There's no rush.
it. Yeah.
And when he says that, time on your side, what he's referring to is the fact that, this isn't a Ted Bundy. This isn't someone who's had, multiple murders outside of this home or is targeting children or women randomly. This was, obviously kind of an in-house, in-home thing that didn't seem to be a pattern that was going on in town. So in all theory, you had some time. You weren't rushing. The town wasn't necessarily on alarm. I don't know. I mean, I did want to ask cases that pop in your head with writings on the wall. Oh, well, I think about the one, what's his name? Daniel? I can see his face clearly. Where the one, I think we called it What's Lurking in Your Walls, where the boy was in the girls, like the dad thought the girls were crazy and that they just couldn't mourn the death of their mother enough, but they were like, no, somebody, and come to find out a guy was living in their walls and painting messages on their walls in their bedrooms.
Yeah, was it frogging or whatever that term was? When
you live in someone's home. Yeah.
The reason I say that is that I thought about it because Jeffrey McDonald, same thing.
Yeah. Well, and then Manson, right?
And Manson, yeah. So you got these two big cases where messages are written, so then someone could say, oh, well, he could have been influenced
this type or whatever. So the dye bit, that one's always interesting to me because people will say, well, whoever had intruded, painted that and got interrupted, so couldn't finish the word bitch. Okay, sure, but so then do you know then that was the last thing that took place in that home?
Right. And what interrupted
them? Mm-hmm. Because nothing happened until potentially 36 hours later.
Yeah. That one's kind of.
So the people who will be on the defense of Jon Feeney will say, well, if he did it, he couldn't have done it. Why would he write this message and go through this extra step to then potentially, but then I'm like, potentially what? Leave a fingerprint? It's his home.
Yeah.
He had no fear of leaving all of his DNA could have been there. No biggie. Right. And then people who will, be on the prosecution side will say, oh yeah, because he's staging it to look like someone else came in there and did that.
Also,
but maybe he, as the husband, doesn't want to write the word "die bitch."
Yeah. Also, why would he write "die bitch"? So that you look at the wife as the motive, as the victim. The killer was focused completely on her. Mm-hmm. She must have been doing something bad. He must have been a good guy. He just wasn't at home. He was at a conference. Yeah. If you're looking at it that way.
Now, I will say that Cheryl's mother has corroborated the fact that Cheryl has talked to her, had previously talked to her about wanting a divorce and had wanted to file for divorce. Now, some people will talk about this did not become admissible in court. We have other close family friends who will say that Jon Feeney's father, Jon's family, his dad was a preacher in a fundamentalist Christian church. So the point that it was described as almost like it's better to die than to get a divorce. They absolutely, a divorce was abhorrent. It was equivalent of going to hell for their particular religion, the way that they believed. And so some will point to where he may have had affairs and may have done this and that, and potentially could have even murdered his family, but any of it would have to have this whole idea of the piety, the appearance of not getting a divorce. So I can read to you what a few peers said. Again, this is circumstantial as well, but the thing is, a lot of this didn't make it into court. And so you can take it for what you will. But let's see here. So we have a college roommate of Cheryl's said that Cheryl was convinced that Jon was sexually abusing their son and was getting ready to file for divorce. Of course, this stuff is hearsay. We don't know the nature of these reports, and we can't corroborate these. But another friend who was a girlfriend after the murder. So Jon had a girlfriend that he dated for a while after the murders of his family, and she has come forward to say a lot of things that she learned about him. And she said, I think one has to know Jon's family to understand why he could have done it. His father, as a pastor, in a Christian fundamentalist church who did not believe in music and divorce was sin that one committed against God himself. Jon was quite the opposite, an active alcoholic with a party guy basically tattooed on his forehead. Jon cared about his parents deeply and was distraught over the pain his sister brought them when her husband divorced her. So divorce was simply an option Jon could not imagine. So again, this was from a girlfriend that he dated after the murders. Let's see here. We got some more things. She also, that same post-murder girlfriend, said that Jon was a pathological liar. She said even when he knows he ultimately will be found out, he does this to his own detriment, thinking his science degree made him smarter than everyone around him. Now, I will say that I've heard a few people say that about Jon. She said, I knew Jon after the murders, and I initially believed that he was innocent, even though he hadn't told me one thing or another. After several months into the relationship, I began seeing all of these inconsistencies and flat-out lies more often than not in his stories, and how much he seemed to manipulate people and situations to always make him look like an innocent victim. And there's just more of that, right? So she says a lot. There's another one that says... Let's see here. Oh, I think I read you all of those. But, I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? I know, but.
Yeah.
Where do you lean?
Oh, I mean, I would lean more towards him. I mean. Yeah, just because of all of that. Again, it sucks because circumstantial.
Well, and again, look at it like, okay, let's say it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to do it now because we're already an hour and 40 minutes in. But if it's not him and it's a stranger, break down that entire crime scene.
Right.
That stuff doesn't make sense.
No, right.
And why? What would that motive be? There wasn't actually a robbery. I will say that Jon then went on to claim on his homeowner's insurance after the fact that over 300 items from the home had been stolen. And when he was deemed not guilty from this, he was able to get a payout from the homeowner's insurance. And I keep seeing $250,000. I know that was the increase in her life insurance policy. So I don't know if this was a typo that was reported on way earlier on. I've never known of a lump sum, like, yes, a lump sum, but usually it's based off of receipts of the items you state were stolen.
Yeah.
Nothing was actually noted per investigators to have been stolen. While things were maybe not in the place they belonged, they were all seemed to have been retrieved. And in multiple drawers throughout the home, there was cash, $40, $60 laying around. So if you're looking at this as an apparent robbery, that actually wasn't the case. And we've talked about it multiple times. You don't often find a robbery or a burglary that then turns into a triple homicide in 3 different bedrooms of varying means. Particularly when, let's say, these 2 children had not even seen, no one had even been out of the bed. So there was no reason to murder the people if your motive was burglary. So none of this really, I mean, that's why when you say, okay, it's not him, let's start looking at other options. A lot of these things just don't make a lot of sense.
No.
But that belt, the belt's a big one to me.
Yes.
And ultimately, it sounds like, very, very sadly, but it sounds like Tyler had been a victim long before all of this took place. But I think that wraps up this stuff. Again, you guys go back. I need to update quite a few things on Instagram, actually, but go to Andre Upload. I'll go on and throw on some pictures from this case and the one from a couple weeks ago. I don't think not sure if I did, but we covered Lily and Jack Sullivan 2 weeks ago, and those are the missing children out of Nova Scotia. At this point now, I imagine it's been 6 weeks, because I think it was a month that they'd been missing when we covered it 2 weeks ago, and they are 4 and 6 years old, so we're still keeping an eye on that. And then this week, actually on June 15th, so 2 days ago, was made 4 years since little Summer Wells in East Tennessee went missing. And that's a horrible one in and of itself, my goodness. But there's just a lot going on, it feels like. Still got ASHA degree kind of on the back burner here, kind of simmering while some new developments are taking place. And then again, in German police have reopened some search warrants and stuff for Madeleine McCann, who went missing many, many years ago in Portugal. So there's kind of a lot going on. But these things, while sad but true, it gives hope to, these things that look like they would not have been solved otherwise. So let's, hope some of that stuff moves forward. Again, check us out. You can go to Instagram, Andrea Uplate. If you'd like, give that a follow if you don't already. And I'll put some photos up from tonight's case. And anything else I might be missing on there. You can follow Brian at Brian Sanders Disruptors on Instagram. You can find him on YouTube.
I've actually been putting
and he's been putting
more
out. He's been a little more active on YouTube lately. And again, if you're watching here, you already know. If you're just listening through an audio stream and you want to catch us on a live show, we welcome that. We enjoy seeing you guys in the chats. We got Greg LaMontagne. I see him in the chats right there. And he says, see you Saturday. We will be seeing him Saturday. He and Beth, if you don't already listen to them, go check out. I mean, Greg, come on, man. Like, it's going to take me 10 minutes at the end of the show to list all of the shows that you guys have. You can always start with The Bar is Open with Beth and Greg. It's a lot of fun. It's like just kind of whatever's current, pop culture, news, headlines, these kinds of things. And Beth and Greg are hilarious and just even more importantly, super sweet individuals. And we love them. We always enjoy talking to them and watching their show. And we're having a big old party on Saturday. And they're flying all the way out from Texas to the East Coast out here in North Carolina to come party with us. So we're looking forward to that. So follow them there. Beth has been reading some naughty lady books, and she's got a new show called Beth's Naughty Reads, and it's got a really dope background. It looks really cool. So they got one called Baldy and the Big Guy. Castro Files. Holy cow. All right, you guys, you're crazy. So a whole lot. They got a lot going on. We got Tyler S in the chats, Brittany Faulkner. We had Davy Jacobson. We had
Bosco jumped in.
Bosco's
He's got the Forever Road podcast.
Bosco has the Forever Road podcast. I don't even know. I saw it earlier, but it was right when I was getting started. We had Grab Ass for a second. Felony Melanie. Oh, yes. How could I forget? We had our new listener, Ellie Walker, or I say new, at least new to our chats. She may be a new one as well. So, anyway, we do enjoy you guys coming on live like this and talking to us. What's up?
Why don't we tell people that, hey, jump on the chat. Say if you listen on the show, go to YouTube, jump in the chats, and bring a friend with you.
And bring a friend. All of you hit that like button.
Yeah, hit that like button.
Yeah, definitely bring a friend. And she said her email address is so embarrassing. You don't even know. I'm not going to do it because I married the man, so I'm not going to say it out loud. But what?
I have the coolest email. No, don't. I stopped using it. Don't worry. Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, the good news is, Felony Melanie, nobody sees it. So log in with whatever email you want. I'm sorry if it was embarrassing. Again, you were given that at birth. We can't help that for you. But it's free. So you guys hop in and talk to us. We enjoy it. Always.
Boom.
That's all I got. Yeah. So just send us all the good stuff. We'd appreciate it. And come party with us if you want to. Saturday, live music starts at 8. So there's going to be a taco truck.
Right? Yeah, and my brother's going to go into the fourth dimension.
Send help, everyone. Send help. That's all we can say. All right, guys. Look, we love you guys, and we truly appreciate you. And by the end of the show, I'm always thinking, well, I don't want to wait 2 weeks for another show, but then
I know.
You guys, it's summertime and it's a lot of work. And we're trying to help out and do some other things that aren't involved, that are true crime related, but not involved with the podcast. So that takes a little time as well. Davey said, is VC's middle name what I think it is? I don't know what you think it is, but now I'm curious. Very curious. Tyler's going to be here in spirit, he says.
Cool.
Tyler, aren't you all the way up in a whole different country and stuff?
You need like a passport or something. Colonel. That's right. Colonel Sanders.
Colonel Sanders. That's him. How'd you know?
We actually hung out with my cousins that nicknamed me that ago. Nicknamed me Colonel Sanders when I was about 5, and it drove me crazy. I'd want to fight. I'm Colonel Sanders.
Look, Tyler is in a whole different country.
Yeah.
He's up there up north.
That's crazy talk.
That is crazy talk. Well, we love you guys, and we always appreciate y'all. And we want to hang with y'all. Come party.
I know.
We'd love it.
I know.
Come to the beach with us.
Hey, maybe we'll do a summer episode where we talk a little true crime. We also laugh and joke a little bit more.
Yes, we can do that.
I like laughing and joking with you.
Yes. If you don't get pushing me out of my chair. All right. Do you want to tell the people good night?
Yes. Good night, everybody.
All right. All right, guys. We really appreciate you. And until next time, I guess we will see y'all next Tuesday. So good night, y'all.